Bella? Bella, right?
Put it on the screen.
All right, it looks like it's 10 a.m. We'll go ahead and get started this morning. Welcome, and I want to wish everyone a very pleasant good morning wherever you may be. I'm Julie Arthur. I'm the CASH chair. I'm also the Executive Director of Facilities and Plannings for Palm Springs Unified School District. I hope that you and your families are safe and well during the COVID-19 pandemic. CASH has been providing you with weekly webinars to ensure that our members have the latest and best information to help school districts and county offices of education as we look to the return of our students and teachers to our schools really soon. Last week's CASH webinar was part one of maintenance and operations, sanitizing, disinfecting, healthy air, and constant monitoring. Really good conversation information shared as we all start the process of reimagining how our schools and classrooms will function when school reopens, cleaning protocols, costs, and we also had Letty Boggs talk about how to be ready for accounting for your FEMA funds and how to start that now, as we know our federal funds come as reimbursements. So for a recording and the answers prepared from the questions asked during this webinar, please visit our CASH website and click on the COVID-19 link to see this and other info links surrounding the COVID-19. So today is our 9th in our series of webinars, and it is part 2 of the maintenance and operations portion, discussing sanitizing, disinfecting, and cleaning playgrounds, athletic, and large assembly indoor facilities. On screen with me this morning is Jeff Becker, our Vice Chair of CASH, and he's with the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools office. He's going to tell us a little bit about the panelists this morning. And good morning, Jeff. How are you doing?
Well, good morning, Julie. I'm doing well here in the heat in the Central Valley, along with most of us in the state. How's Palm Springs doing?
Palm Springs is doing really well. We're going to hit about 110 today. So all those little pesky COVIDs floating around will be melted away because we're going to be able to fry an egg on the sidewalk. So
yeah, and hopefully not on your dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell you, Riverside County, we've hit a new phase. We're not quite phase 3 yet. We're phase 2A. So everyone's pretty excited. Restaurants opened over the Memorial weekend with social distancing. And even more exciting is barbershops and the hair salons are now allowed to open. So I think everyone's been sending their texts out frantically trying to get in to see their stylist. So a lot of activity here.
Yeah, we're in the same position in Fresno County. We're in stage 2.5 with restaurants and hairstylists. I'm going to go later today and see if I can get a haircut. I'm excited about that after 2.5 months without being able to do that. I'll say in my house, we're also really excited for walk-through graduation on Monday. So I have a high school senior, and I just wanted to recognize, while this isn't how any of us wanted to celebrate our students, as a parent of a senior, I'm particularly thankful for all the empathy and care and hard work that all of our school professionals have done to honor all of our students. I'm going to get a little emotional about it, but it does make a difference to the students and the parents, and I know we don't say thank you enough, so I want to thank all those people. And I know a lot of the maintenance and facility folks on this call today have had a part in that. Thank you personally for that hard work. On the business side, we're digging into reopening now, and I'm ordering huge amounts of supplies so that we have it ready in August when school opens. And starting to dig into more of the details of our plans, looking at things for our students with special needs and the medical procedures that we perform, how we're going to do that safely to avoid aerosol transmission. So we're busy.
Oh yeah. Oh, same here. We are. We were fortunate. We hit the front page of the newspaper, the local newspaper here, with our budget deficit. So it's much more enjoyable to think about how we're going to style our classrooms and get those safe to have our kids back, because having those students back is pretty important to us as well. So I've got two nieces who are seniors, high school seniors this year. So it's been very interesting. One's in Wisconsin though. So the restrictions are much less involved there than they are with my other niece who's in Ukaipa. So, you know, again, I feel for you, Jeff, on that. I know that you guys have great plans on it. And so, and when is the first visit to the university that she is?
Well, to not bore everybody too much, but move-in date at Berkeley is August 18th. And I'm thinking that'll be the first opportunity for her to be back on campus there.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, so we're fingers crossed there. Well, why don't I cover a little housekeeping and then introduce our panelists and we'll get going. So we do have the chat box on your screen. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment as we're going through the presentation, you can type your question in that chat box and make sure you are sending your message to all panelists and attendees by using that drop-down caret. And CASH staff will be monitoring that for discussion at the end of each segment, as well as at the end of the broadcast as time allows. And lastly, our webinar is being recorded and will be made available to CASH members for future viewing on our website. So now let me share with you who we have on our panel today. We're joined by Lance Bidnick from Newport Mesa Unified School District, as well as Ted Norman from Capistrano Unified. We have Lynn Lees from Kaya, Kenda Daria from FlexGround, Greg Morales from AFE Sports, and finally Marty Holm from Atkinson, Andelson, Loya, Rude, and Romo. And so why don't Lance and Ted, I believe you're first up, why don't you take over here and share with us your thoughts on keeping our schools healthy and safe?
Good morning, Jeff. Thank you. Good morning, Julie. My name is Lance Bidnick, Director of Maintenance and Operations at the Newport Mesa Unified School District. Thank you, Julie. And joining me is Ted Norman, Director of Maintenance from Capistrano Unified School District. Good morning, Ted.
Morning, everybody. How's everyone doing?
All right. Do we have another slide? All right. So just a quick overview. I'm going to kind of move fast to the first few slides because a lot of it's just kind of recapping where we're at. Jeff, I like that you mentioned we're at stage 2.5. As I was typing this slide up, I was putting stage 2, and then my wife yelled at me, "Hey, we're in stage 3," and I thought, "There's no way." So I quick Googled, and sure enough, Governor announced that we're in the early stages of stage 3. So just showing how fast that this is moving and changing for us. Stage 2, included in stage 2 is that schools can open up as early as July or August with some modifications. What we're looking at is what kind of an impact do those modifications have on our departments. The Orange County Schools has started to put together a committee of business officials to look at exactly what the impact is going to be when we bring students back, not quite knowing exactly how we're going to do it. But what we're trying to do is coordinate our efforts and make sure that all of our local schools and neighbors are doing more or less the same thing, so we don't have some outliers, and also to help some of our other directors that are facing the challenges, providing some recommendations to some of the school districts. Next slide, please. Focus on student safety and staff. It looks like every indication is that when students come back, there's going to be some major changes. For all students and staff, distancing is going to be the biggest issue that we face. Capistrano's has been running some exercises with kind of creating mock classrooms to see what the return to school is going to look like with spacing. Ted, can you go into a little bit more detail on what Capistrano's been doing in this?
Yeah, so what we did for leadership here at our district was we laid out a typical portable classroom, 24 by 40, 960 square feet. Believe it or not, we have well over 1,000 modular classrooms in our district, and wanted to give people a visual of what a 6x6 grid would look like in a portable classroom. if it was empty, if it had chairs, if it had desks. And we took a video of that and shared with leadership, just so they could start looking at some planning. You know, with minimal furniture, with minimal accessories, you can get 16 students in a 960 classroom. But as we all know, not every facility is the same, not every classroom is the same, and not every classroom teacher is the same. So I think what a lot of folks are settled in on is, how do we get 10 to 12 kiddos in a classroom, and what does that look like? So we've actually circled back, and we're physically measuring available floor space throughout the districts. We've started that exercise this week, but I encourage those that have the time and resource, you know, look at your existing facilities. What type of recommendations can you make to your site leaders or ed services? There's a big difference between 10 and 12 kids in a classroom and 16 when you're talking about staggering your school day and AM and PM and a lot of those considerations. So space matters.
Hey, Ted, are you actually removing desks and furniture from the classrooms when you do this?
That's a great talking point. Our recommendation to leadership is going to be to leave the existing student furniture in place. The recommendation will be to remove as much non-essential furniture as possible. But if you think about it, removing tens of thousands of desks from school facilities is not realistic, and we just don't have the warehouse space for it. So what we've been talking about on the county committee and here locally is, by keeping the student desks in place, if you do go to a AB program, the furniture will help provide some of that social distancing for you, and could help with custodial in regards to what recommendations come out as far as disinfecting and cleaning classrooms. So our recommendation is going to be to leave as much of the existing furniture in place, and hopefully when this thing comes to an end, we're not all chasing and scrambling to set classrooms back up for 30, 32, 36 students.
I think that's great that you're doing that, because you can actually walk into the classroom and see what it's going to look like and how it's going to feel. You know, distancing is going to play such a big role, and when you can't have that distancing, you know, physical barriers start to come into question. And I'm going to kind of jump into the next topic here for school site staff as well. The distance.
Lance, before you go, it's Tom Duffy. Just going back to Ted for a moment. Ted, has your district made a decision to social distance with an AB organizational structure and with somewhere between 12 and 16 children per classroom?
We have not. We have a district committee, as well as Lance and I participating in the countywide committee, and leadership is making some of those, looking at all of those options and hoping to take some things to the June 17th local school board, in hopes to get some feedback here locally. So like everyone in the state, we're looking at all the options and what's realistic for us and what's realistic for us in Orange County. But no, we have not settled in on a number or an alternate schedule. We're looking at all of those options. A survey went out to our communities last Friday, and I think by Monday, Tuesday morning, the district had gotten 15,000 parent response in regards to distance learning and social distancing, and really just trying to gauge the community. So like all of you, we're looking at all those options and looking to make some recommendations.
And you had 15,000 responses to your survey, and remind us how many students you have in the district. What's your size?
We're just south of 50,000.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. You know, kind of a couple of things that Ted just mentioned and Tom just brought up as well. The one thing that we know is there's going to be some kind of a staggered school schedule, and to be prepared for that. Not all the students are going to be able to come back and maintain all the distancing and everything else. Site staff is going to be the same issues with distancing. Information or a publication from the Marin County Schools, it pointed out that non-custodial staff may also be requested to do some additional cleaning and disinfecting, especially in the classroom areas. It could be certificated staff, it could be non-custodial classified. The fact of the matter is it takes a long time to clean and disinfect a classroom. properly. We did time studies, and it suggests anywhere from 15 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes to clean every surface and disinfect it. That's just with the equipment that we have on hand. Cold foggers, there's a really great presentation last week from Long Beach on this CASH webinar, talking about the technology that's available, and they said they cut that time down to about 2 minutes, effectively 2 to 5 minutes. Multiplying that by the number of classroom spaces, if we expect that we're going to clean and disinfect every classroom after every passing period, that's just going to be a big challenge for our custodial staff to accomplish. So looking at these things and presenting this information to our county committee, so we can go back to our schools, and like Ted mentioned, he has a district committee as well, sharing this information, sharing what we're finding, so people can make sound decisions. Physical barriers. I hear a lot of talk about installing physical barriers, especially in the classrooms. One of the things is, why do we need to install physical barriers? And it's when we can't maintain the distancing that's required. Dense office space or classroom space might need a barrier if you can't accommodate the distancing. But having a barrier around every classroom table and every learning space, eventually, you know, these things will become obsolete. We're going to have a whole lot of plastic laying around. The other big focus is going to be on indoor air quality. Again, I am kind of moving quickly through some of these topics because a lot of these were discussed previously. Next slide, please. The last webinar, as Julie mentioned at the beginning of this, went into a really in-depth discussion with indoor air quality. I am not going to try to do that topic any justice here, other than to mention that this is our opportunity to make our maintenance and operations department realize its importance, and make the other departments realize that maintenance and operations is one of the most critical departments for getting students back into the classroom. Indoor air quality is going to be one of the big issues, in addition to proper cleaning and disinfecting. We're taking this as our opportunity to review our indoor air quality plan, utilize the EPA's tools for schools and resources from other districts to share information and plans on how to improve indoor air quality, preparing for increased costs for maintenance and operations, utility bills, continuously running our fans before and during occupancy. You know, we're anticipating a higher labor and material cost for not just the repair and replacement of equipment that might not have been running continuously before, but also preventive maintenance. My experience in multiple districts has been preventive maintenance happens, but probably not at the frequency it should. Some districts have a very robust maintenance program. They're able to hit their units every year. Not every district can do that. Maintenance every 2 to 3 years isn't uncommon. This is our opportunity to really examine and focus and prioritize preventive maintenance, and then documenting all of our activities.
Two comments on that, Lance. I think first off, you know, districts should be really cautious about being sold a bill of goods as far as, you know, some of these products that are out there as far as disinfecting the air. For one, we haven't really seen or heard of anything that's effective or proven. I don't think CDC has any guidelines or recommendations for schools as far as trying to clean the air. So your focus here on ventilation, filtration, and PM is really critical. You know, as part of the ventilation component, I think what we're going to find is more folks with doors and windows wide open in August and 100 degrees trying to introduce fresh air on their own. So your point is well taken about the wear and tear on equipment and run times and energy consumption. So I think that's should be noted for all folks.
You know, on April 14th, ASHRAE published a document. It's ASHRAE's position document on infectious aerosols. And it really talks in great depth about recommendations for airflow and ventilation. Unfortunately, I didn't have that link up in the link section of this, but there was an ASHRAE documentation, again, the position document on infectious aerosols. Decent read there. Documenting all of your activities, not just to CYA. So if you have a positive case, that you can show that you've done the proper maintenance of your maintenance equipment, mechanical equipment, but also, as Letty Boggs had discussed, you have FEMA reimbursements or anything else that's related to this, making sure that you're tracking all of your costs for what you're doing for COVID response. Also, the visibility of your maintenance department and communicating that your maintenance department truly cares about the building occupants, the students, and the staff that's teaching these kids and coming back and putting themselves in this position. Again, running the fans continuously. We fully expect the teachers are going to do what teachers normally do and open all of their doors and windows and run the equipment. Higher costs for energy use, higher costs for maintenance. Reviewing your IIPP, your board policies for air quality, but also is your energy management plan in conflict with your indoor air quality plan. Making sure that your energy plan doesn't state things that's contrary to maintaining good indoor air quality. And lastly, this is kind of a big one, and I'm surprised how few districts don't have this, mine included. Setting clear building expectations. So if you have a building occupant like a teacher, what are their expectations for using the classroom? Usually the indoor air quality plan would talk about not having pets and animals inside the classroom, talks about not having aerosols or plug-in air fresheners, but I would challenge any school district to walk into a classroom and not find a plug-in air freshener, at least somewhere at the school, or multiple. But it also talks about setting the building expectations to limit personal appliances like refrigerators and cooking devices, limiting clutter, limiting the amount of combustible material on wall coverings, and really concentrating on those other things. As Ted was talking about the building space and layout of the room, when the teachers have that old couch that they don't want at their house anymore and they bring it into their classroom, these things are big issues for us in maintenance and operations. In the time of COVID, those are going to be extremely hard to disinfect properly. But any other time, it's something that takes up more classroom space. It gets in the way of cleaning. It's one more thing that adds to the clutter. So anything that we can do, our custodial staff is going to be so burdened with the responsibilities of increased disinfecting that it's one of the requirements for reopening of schools. They need to not be having to work around all of the teachers' personal belongings. Next slide, please. With a focus on frontline maintenance and operations employees, this is all of our maintenance, grounds, and custodial workers. Employee safety for our folks is just as important as it is for the students and teaching staff. Capistrano has kind of taken in my opinion, a very reasonable approach early on in response to this. And Ted, am I correct to say that your operations haven't changed too significantly with bringing staff back to work?
That's correct. We took the stance, and with the support of CSEA and district leadership, M&Os worked continually since the shutdown on March 13th. Leading up to it in early March, directive was all hands on deck. Let's get as much disinfecting accomplished at the schools as possible. And then inevitably March 13th was the shutdown. M&O picked up and we were back at work Monday morning. And we've been living through this every day since March 13th. So we've had to establish some, protocols and best practices on the fly in regards to social distancing and making sure staff have PPE and just trying to communicate as best we can given this new environment. We're a very large department, nearly 250 employees district-wide. So regular communications, consistent communication, supervisors getting out in the field and getting with their folks. But we've maintained our operations for the most part since the shutdown.
This is a great test case. Our district has brought limited staff back. We just, last night actually was the first time our night custodians came back. And all of our employees are working about an average of 20 hours a week. So I think Capistrano is a great test case. What kinds of challenges have you had with the personal protective equipment and distancing with your maintenance and operations employees?
Sure. We've been pretty successful in making sure staff have gloves and masks. Early on, there was a concern over the N95s. We were able to procure some KN95s, distribute those, but really social distancing has been really critical. And you know, in mid-April, once the recommendation came out about face coverings, cloth face coverings, most staff that I see now are you know, they've procured something or made something on their own. But if not, we're providing that for them. We've modified our check-in procedures, our custodial crews out of the school sites. We've maintained their traditional AM, PM scheduling to maximize social distancing. At the high schools where we have 8 custodians, you know, everyone's in their area. If they're working on a team project, obviously, you know, gloves and masks. But we've been successful at a modified summer program in April and May, you know, without forcing staff to work in close proximity, and we've been able to get a lot done. Some of the concerns along the way have been teachers showing up unannounced, and then that interaction, that uncomfortable interaction, you know, not having the expectation to see someone. Most school sites administrative staff have been on site every day in limited numbers. So we've had folks out at the schools since the shutdown. We have 0 confirmed cases in the district that I'm aware of. We have had staff take advantage of HR 6201 because of childcare needs. Essentially, they've gotten 2 weeks at 2/3 pay. So we've had about 15 or so staff in the last 6 or 8 weeks take advantage of that. We've been flexible with staff on using vacation time and sick time, and if they need to leave a little early, come in a little later, so on and so forth. We've been flexible with folks. Staggered start times to minimize distancing in the morning. Grounds crews, rather than riding together traditionally, providing spare vehicles where possible, or having them drive their personal vehicle to the school site. So really just using common sense. Obviously online meetings, you know, minimizing in-person meetings and just trying to communicate with staff via email and notices and so on and so forth.
I think that's one of the big questions that we had was we have 4 groundsmen and a crew, and how do we do that? And we have our grounds crews alternating every other week. But when we're sharing a vehicle, we wear our masks. That's maintenance, that's warehouse drivers as well. If we have to do something where we have we need a team lift or something that requires more than 1 employee to work in close proximity, reviewing that with the supervisor before they engage in it, making sure they have the proper protective equipment, just making sure you have some kind of a work plan. The other thing that we do is the coordination piece. We have a concern with office staff or teachers that maintenance was in their room and nobody knew about it, and now they're afraid that their room is contaminated or dirty. So what we ask our managers and technicians to do is coordinate with the person whose office that you're working in, let them know that you're in there. And if they're not in there and you can't coordinate with them, then leave behind some kind of a calling card that says, you know, I care. I'm concerned for your protection as well. I did this work on this date and I cleaned and disinfected when we left. Next slide, please. Emergency response, and this has been a big one. So we haven't at Newport, and I know Ted just reported that they haven't had an instance where there's been a positive case of somebody coming to work sick, but I know that there is a nearby school district that has had 2 instances so far since employees have left. They're allowing some staff to come back and work from the classrooms, and it kind of left them scrambling as far as what do we do, and making sure that we have an emergency plan, and again, the focus on our frontline employees' safety. CDC guidelines for cleaning and disinfecting the room, letting the room air out for 24 hours before reentry, and then cleaning and disinfecting it afterwards. Evaluate, do you use your own staff or are you going to contract it? What's the pros and cons? Contractors can be very expensive, but if you're using your own staff, are they properly trained? Do they have the right PPE? What kind of extra training are you providing? We actually found a local vendor that provides training to most of the abatement companies that are sending us about 100 emails a week advertising their services. We reached out to them. They have an online training course, so we're going to put some of our custodial staff through that. We're working with HR to make sure that there's no change in work conditions or impact to bargain. Part of the protective equipment that they will be required to wear, however, are respirators. And so we're beefing up our respirator program, making sure that we're providing the right materials, sending the employees for medical evaluation, and updating our IIPP to make sure that it's accurate and not just kind of off the shelf from our insurance carrier, that it's actually catered to our district. And then finally, the communication plan. When you have an active emergency, imagine the principal is going to be in a panic and they're just going to call their custodian and send them into the room. Make sure that you can communicate whatever your written plan is for responding to an emergency for COVID. Install the barriers and signage to make sure that nobody goes into that room for 24 hours. And then make sure that once the room's clear and safe, you're providing the clearance information to the administrator and to the building occupant to let them know that it's safe to re-enter. But the big thing is that nobody accidentally stumbles on that room, or nobody that's not properly equipped to go into that room is going in there without the proper protective equipment. And next slide, I just have some links here. These are some quick links. I know we're going to be talking about some of the disinfectants and list in for approved disinfectants, making sure that when we do disinfect, we're using stuff that is actually going to be effective against coronavirus. The CDC recommendations for schools, it seems that this is continuously updated. Also, the Healthy Schools Act training. Remember that anybody that uses any kind of disinfectant is required to have the DPR training for disinfectants. And this would include volunteers. So if you have volunteers that are working at your school and they want to pick up a disinfectant wipe, they will be required to have this training as well. Also, under no circumstances should students be using disinfectants on surfaces. That does not include hand sanitizers. So hand sanitizers are not regulated by the Department of Pesticide Regulations. So they do not have the same, because they're applied to the body, they do not have the same requirements for training or use. And that is all that I have.
All right. Well, thank you, Lance and Ted, so much. That was great information. One question. I know sometimes as we're looking to purchase things, in fact, I had a vendor who was very kind and delivered a care package, and it included hand sanitizers in it, some nice big bottles, 70% alcohol. So I can't take them out to the schools. Can't have them at the district office. We can't have any of the hand sanitizers with alcohol in them. So that's a tough one.
So we actually have I have a distillery right next to my house, and they started making hand sanitizers out of their higher proof alcohols. So definitely get that.
Yeah. I know we forget. We think, for us and carrying it and making sure hand sanitizers, but the school sites and on school property, nothing with alcohol in it. So that's.
And that was another question that came up too, is providing increased access to hand washing stations. And do you install new sinks, or do you bring in the kind of the portable wash stations like you see at the fair or concerts, or just having the hand sanitizer stations throughout the school and strategic locations, and is that adequate? So those are some of the things that we're looking at in our county group as well.
When I was actually, as I was going through and trying to do in my district for recommendations for different things. And looking at costs, those portable hand washing stations, they're easily 1,000, maybe a little more. And then making sure the water's there and everything. So I think we're probably going to stay with multiple hand sanitizers everywhere, just as a cost efficient. You know, again, as you mentioned, we're probably only going to need these for a short period of time, maybe one school year. And then what do we do with all these things?
Cost is one thing. Lead times is another, as I'm sure a lot of folks are experiencing right now. Lead times on most of these products is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think just kind of looking at the chat, I did see one question. School Services actually put out a memo back in, I don't know if it was in February or March, talking about the Healthy Schools Act and whether or not hand sanitizers fall under the DPR regulation. Hand sanitizers do not, including the alcohol-based hand sanitizers. It's only a pesticide or a disinfectant that's applied to the surface. Anything that's registered for application to the body, including medications, lotions, hand sanitizers, soaps, things like that, they are not included or under the DPR for Healthy Schools Act. So they don't require the training to be able to use a hand sanitizer. The other, I think the important thing to know too is the hand sanitizer used as a surface sanitizer to think you're skirting the DPR requirement is a misuse of the product according to the label. So not something that you want to be doing to skirt your requirements for training for under the Healthy Schools Act.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. Great information. Still lots of things to think about and get ready for. And we're a little bit over 60 days away in our district to opening back up on August 5th. So yeah, we got 60 days. We can do it.
Good luck.
Thanks. All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Lynn Lees from Kaya, who's going to be actually talking to us about materials, sanitizing, and cleaning. So Lynn, go ahead and unmute. Great to see you.
Thank you, Julie. I'm really happy to be here. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with some of our more auxiliary areas as it relates to sports and sporting locations. How we're probably going to wind up using those moving forward in the interim is for additional flex spaces. I know these conversations have been going on for a while. Everyone is trying to get their plans together as to what that looks like. So let's jump into it. Go ahead, next slide. So we've all seen the different materials and services and equipment and gear that's out there: foggers, sprayers, extractors for carpet, UV lights, steam. Now there's probiotics, disruptive surface coatings, all that kind of good stuff. And something that I want to focus on before we jump into the specific spaces is how important it is to not try and create a blanket solution for all spaces or all surfaces. Every surface reacts a little differently with the virus, and the virus is sustained a little differently per surface. So when we're thinking of disinfecting and cleaning processes, it's important to take that into consideration. Go ahead, next slide. So this is a virus. They are 1,000 times smaller than bacteria, sneaky little buggers. So the next few slides we're going to go through, I actually borrowed from UCSF. I don't know if anyone else on here was part of that webinar, but they had some great timeline in terms of half-life statistics through a study that was just done this spring in 2020. Go ahead, next slide. So SARS-CoV-2, that is what a lot of labs are labeling and calling COVID-19. So anywhere on these next few slides, SARS-CoV-2 refers to the COVID virus. So as we know, it can persist on hard surfaces. The good news is, so far as we can tell, it does not persist very long aerosol-wise. And when the medical industry refers to aerosol, they mean any type of aspiration, as though if you were giving someone CPR, those types of aerosols are what they're talking about within the air. So the virus itself has to attach to something like a particle or a dust piece. And remember, these are really, really, really tiny, so they can attach to a lot of stuff. So half-lives, why is that important? And the reason I want to touch on that, thank you to the UCSF, is because that helps us plan out what our plans can be when dealing with a potentially contaminated area, or even just trying to feel confident as we go through these cleaning and disinfecting procedures as to what our realities are. Go ahead, next slide. So the interesting thing is that when you're dealing with half-life of the COVID virus, or any virus for that matter, it is going to vary depending on what type of material it is on and attached to. If a basic half-life breakdown, I'm sure everyone understands, but at the time of contamination, it's considered at 100%. And then over time, how much of that virus on a surface is left? And how does it die? How does it deteriorate and cut those half-lives as time goes on? Go ahead, next slide. So as you can see here, porous versus non-porous. This is going to become really important for us as we are looking to utilize these flex spaces like MPRs, gymnasiums, wrestling rooms, etc. We're used to dealing with bacterial infections, MRSA, all that kind of stuff. So what does that look like when we're dealing with the virus? And it seems like for non-porous surfaces, like any kind of paper or cardboard product or fabric, it doesn't live as long on non-porous materials, which is good news. For anyone that's utilizing those foggers or sprayers within a classroom, I know there are some out there with the solvents. If they're used properly, they say that papers don't need to be displaced. They can stay and continue to work even through the fogger without being moved off to the side. Obviously, ideally, we would like to clear the entire hard surface or any surface that we're disinfecting, but we all know that the reality of that is pretty slim. So going to hard surface as opposed to porous, like stainless steel or plastic, we deal with a lot of stuff, aluminum, bleachers, etc. The half-life is going to come into play as we determine how frequently do we need to disinfect, how many times as these locations get exposed, as students come in and out or staff come in and out, do we need to be doing the disinfecting in addition to standard cleaning? Go ahead, next slide. The other interesting thing that this study found out is that actually the virus increases in higher humidity environments. So what does that mean for our aquatic centers, our indoor pool areas, our locker rooms, our showers in our locker rooms? Obviously, those are significantly down the line because we're just trying to get our classrooms organized for educational purposes. But it's something to think of and look to the future as we choose what spaces to utilize as flex. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so jumping right into it, for gymnasiums, well, there's a lot of different types of surfaces in these areas. There's hard surface, the plastic, the aluminum, the hard floor, whether it's natural maple or synthetic, the padding, etc. What does it look like for us as we try and move forward? Is this gym going to become a cafeteria? Is it going to get segmented out as different learning spaces? Are we utilizing our net dividers to help define some of those classroom spaces? And what does that mean for cleaning and disinfecting? Well, on a standard gymnasium clean, the recommendations are always to remove debris and then clean with a wet mop all the surfaces, and then disinfect. So we hear a lot about disinfecting, and foggers and sprayers are great, but it's important to remember that disinfecting is not cleaning. It's not going to remove residue. It's not going to get rid of the grime. It's ideal to come after that type of cleaning. Go ahead, next slide. So there's a representation. Remove debris, then clean, and then disinfect. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so MPRs and synthetic options in terms of gymnasium flooring are a lot more popular these days, especially in middle schools. So is there anything different we need to be doing on those cushion-backed products? As far as we can tell at the moment, actually they are a lot easier to clean and deal with because they're not as finicky as natural maple wood floors, especially when it comes to moisture content. So as you're wiping down, washing down, spraying down your different surfaces in a gym location, if you have a rolled good synthetic floor that's impervious, it's vinyl, it's designed to handle moisture. It's not going to be as affected if you have an overspray or too much residual moisture or anything dripping from the bleachers that's collecting on the floor. It's not going to be adverse to it. You can just clean it up later. If it happens to dry on site, it's not the end of the world. For natural maple with polyurethane or any other type of protective coating, that's a different story. It does not like moisture. Natural wood gym floors, as we all know, they are a little prima donna and they like to be carefully cared for. So what does that look like when we're using this as a cafeteria space or another classroom space? And I think it's just being mindful of what the material is underneath you or around you, and making sure that when it comes to natural wood, we're not exposing it to too much oversaturation of moisture. We want to get the surface clean. We want to fog it and get it disinfected. We want to maintain that standing wetness so that the virus is in fact killed when we're using our disinfectant. But beyond that, we don't want to go above and beyond or have too much moisture where it's going to adversely affect the surface. Go ahead, next slide. So just like I was saying, these obviously are cots, but I thought they could also represent potential future tables, how we might have to get creative using these extra flex spaces as we look to bring students back into the school site. In terms of the netting, that's a soft surface, most of them. Some of them have vinyl attributes to them. Depending on what your netting would be, would dictate the best way in which to disinfect. It'd be nice to think that kids aren't going to touch it or lean on it or fiddle with it, but they will. So when it comes to the fabric netting, the good news is that the virus does not live very long. According to the study, it said between 2 to 6 hours, typically speaking, on a fabric porous material. But if there is a disinfectant that needs to happen, they're usually pretty resilient, the foggers or the sprayers, as long as your manufacturer has approved the solvent that you're using in those. You shouldn't have a problem spraying them down just the same as you would the table surfaces, the chair surfaces, or the flooring surfaces. Go ahead, next slide. Auditoriums, same thing. Just be cognizant. What is natural wood? What is synthetic? What does carpet look like? You know, I've heard rumors that some districts, because of the non-porous ability for the virus half-life to decrease, now they want to put carpet everywhere. This is a situation we don't know how long will continue. So we want to be mindful of what are the best solutions we have available to us, and what does the long term look like as well as the short term when we're thinking about these flex spaces. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so weight rooms. I know it's weird to bring this up because who is using a gym or a weight room right now? It's probably going to be a while before those become full swing. But I have seen a lot of times, especially depending on the teams that you guys have, there are game rooms, there are strategy rooms, there are additional flex spaces available in these types of facilities. The standard for cleaning weight room equipment is to spray the cloth first and wipe it down. Obviously, with our need to sanitize, I would definitely recommend talking to your equipment manufacturer before using a fogger or sprayer to make sure that the electronics portion of this equipment isn't going to be adversely damaged, or they might have a specific brand that they have found is safe. There are electronic disinfectants out there that are safe for your computer screens. I don't know if they have been used in mass quantity like a backpack fogger or sprayer version, but I do know that they exist, and I definitely would be interested if anyone has a contact that could answer that question. It might be a quicker way to disinfect these types of equipment and materials. But my creative brain was thinking, well, for high schoolers, as we get started and we have to maintain social distancing and keep these kids active, I don't know, maybe weight rooms might become a 6 feet apart great space for kids to stay active and shift the PE cycle. Rather than collaborative sports in the interim, maybe it can be more individualized physical activity. Go ahead, next slide. So locker rooms, another one. The nice thing about locker rooms is, depending on what your facilities look like, oftentimes they have drains in the floor. They are already prepped and designed with tile or resilient surfacing like aluminum, etc., that can handle a little more heavy duty cleaning, like a pressure washer scenario. Obviously, we want to keep in mind all the necessary PPE. Anytime aerosol type situation is going to arise from steam or from backsplash, if you are going to use a pressure washer, make sure you have those respirators, goggles, and proper protective equipment. But the good news is, including a lot of our bathrooms, they're designed to get washed from about 7 feet down with pressure washers. Okay, go ahead, next slide. Wrestling rooms. I didn't even think about this until I was on a webinar last week where someone mentioned, hey, we have a pretty good size wrestling room. Our wrestling team is pretty competitive. What could we do with that space? So I can't even imagine what everyone is trying to plan. But I got excited that there are all these little nooks and crannies on campuses that we can try and revamp and revisit and shift into what we need for getting students back on campus in the interim during this situation. When it comes to wrestling rooms, they do have a tendency to hold a little bit more moisture and humidity, so that is something to keep in mind due to all the padding. A lot of wrestling rooms have the permanent cushioned floor that are installed, as well as the padding on the walls. I don't know if any additional ventilation assistance could help mitigate this, but maybe this is just a flex space that would need to be disinfected more frequently and allowed to air out in between uses a little bit longer, so that that humidity content can come down, so the virus is less likely to survive as well in that environment. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that we can do when we're dealing with any type of indoor athletic facility. Any major debris we can blow with a blower or vacuum and sweep. Like I said before, you want to eliminate all the debris before you go ahead and pressure wash or wet mop or dry mop. And then once the area is clean, then you want to apply the disinfectant or utilize your foggers or other types of equipment. Go ahead, next slide. So outdoor bleachers. One thing that on a CPRS webinar I was on just a few days ago, they mentioned was, okay, so we might not be able to have contact sports yet in the short term. You know, how do you pass a ball? How do you share things? We might not be there yet, but can we get creative? Could we make different relay courses utilizing our outdoor bleachers so that as kids sweat and run, they're less likely to contaminate each other in the open air space rather than the enclosed indoor gymnasium bleachers. Can we do drills and maybe put chalk colors down, have them do different activities at different color points, etc. Get them moving, but able to maintain that 6-foot distance and still have a good time. Go ahead, next slide. So the nice thing that the UCSF also informed us of through this study is that UV does help. It's not a cure-all. I know we've heard it a lot over the years with synthetic turf, that UV kills a lot of viruses, bacteria, and other issues. It is true. It's not 100%, but in terms of the half-life that we were talking about previously, UV minimizes that and shortens that half-life extensively. As you can see, in the darkness, it's about 30 minutes, and in full sunlight, it's a full 2 minutes as related to standard viruses. This statistic is not specific to COVID-19. They're just referencing viruses in general. Go ahead, next slide. So we all know washing our hands is super crucial. Soap is important and it works. Why does it work? Because the structure of a virus needs to be ruptured. That's a very easy way to kill the virus, is if we can rupture its membrane, then it dies, and the particulates of its ruptured cell are no longer a threat to us and our immune systems. Soap does this, and so does some other coatings. Go ahead, next slide, Sam. So if you look at the bottom, disruptive coatings are new to me. I don't know if they're new to the industry, but there are some providers out there that have these disruptive coatings that, rather than only being a sanitizing agent, they stay on the surface of the material. And as far as what I've been able to research, both for porous and non-porous materials, they have different lives in terms of how long this type of coating will last on that surface. But as you can see in the image, these spikes that are penetrating that virus cell, that is what the disruptive coating looks like on a molecular level. So it's all these tiny little spheres. So rather than being a chemical-based assistance in killing off the virus, it is a physical barrier that helps eliminate, or I shouldn't say eliminate, I'm sorry, minimize the growth of the virus on a surface. And there are different ones from a lot of different labs. Some of them last 30 days, some of them say up to 90, some of them say up to 6 months. It will continue to have an effect in disrupting the virus and piercing that cell membrane. So the only other thing that I've learned recently that I do want to point out is a little bit of the difference between cytane-based disruptive coatings, silver-based, and, forgive my lack of pronunciation, but triclosan-based. They're all viable disruptive coatings. Some of them are more feasible in terms of budget than others. I think we've all heard about silver. I've also heard some about copper, etc. I don't know what school districts would be allowed or not allowed to utilize within their facilities, but when dealing with potential disruptive coatings, just take a look at the specs and make sure that it follows your policies and procedures, and that it's not necessarily going to set you up for a conducive environment where the virus can mutate over time. The nice thing about cytane is that because it's a physical disruptor, not a chemical-based disruptor, is that it doesn't support the ability for the virus to mutate. It will just continue to spear the membrane of that virus cell. Okay, go ahead, next slide. So I just threw together a couple resources, and this pretty much wraps up what I have to contribute today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I really found the Facilities Council really helpful. I've sat on a bunch of the webinars of the National School Facilities Council meetings, and they are widely informative. They're sharing a lot of information. Their website is fantastic. They're posting best practices of what's helping or working or successes across the nation. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that, see what other schools and other states are doing in this COVID pandemic that we're all dealing with. And I don't see any questions on the webinar chat. So unless anyone has anything else, thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me be here. And I hope something was informative.
Lan, thanks so much. Great information. A lot of, again, every district's different, so one size doesn't fit all. So having all these ideas out there really is helpful. All right. Okay, next up, we've got Kendra Daria and from FlexGround, and she's going to talk a little bit about, is my playground sanitized? So Kendra.
Hi there, am I on now?
Yes, you are. Great. Good morning.
Hi everyone, my name is Kendra Daria. I am really happy to be a part of this conversation today. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit just so you can understand and know where I come from and why this topic is so important to me. I sit on the NPC, I've been in the industry about 15 years. I sit on the NPCAI board for playground construction. I sit on a couple of ASTM committees for playgrounds. I owned a playground cleaning and sanitizing business starting in 2005. We cleaned indoor, outdoor play spaces, sanitized, did safety audits and that kind of thing. And in that process, I became a presenter for cleaning processes and appropriate chemicals for many of the fast food chains and other similar spaces such as preschools. That company has been sold. It's still up and running. And now I'm the West Coast Specialty Sales Manager at FlexGround, and FlexGround focuses on port and place rubber surfacing, but we do a bunch of other surfacing things for outdoor play spaces as well, sometimes indoor. So I wanted to just establish myself in terms of relevance, for this phone call. I'm really excited about it. This is my passion and my calling and what I've been doing. And I'm really excited to see that California's on the up and moving front to get things going with cleaning and sanitizing these play spaces. When I started, I was explaining to different groups and different associations that we should clean and sanitize. And for very many years of the beginning, it was a struggle to get them to understand why that might be important. So this is really exciting for me and a different approach, and I'm thrilled to be a part of the call. So today, though, I'm going to have a conversation with you about creating a proper approach to the topic, something that many of the things that should be considered when you're setting up your processes and procedures, and then some of the goals that your group here in California might choose to enact in order to continue this conversation. I really want to encourage you in this sense to use this as a platform. This is an opportunity. It's a negative. Of course, the pandemic is not great, but we have now an opportunity in front of us to create a standard, a national standard, a California standard, a school standard. I'm not sure what you'll choose and what, as we go through this, you'll understand a little more what you'll choose to want to do with this information. But I really think this is the beginning of something great and should be approached with some sort of committee to get together with chemists and professional school people, a round table of sorts, to be able to create this standard, knowing too that there are lots of other associations that are having this same struggle. So not feeling alone, beginning the conversation, and then creating something that you can then share with other states of school districts or other groups like preschools, that's something that's interchangeable, because this type of movement hasn't been done before. Everybody, as I get going with different groups, everyone has their own idea when they start the conversation. I've seen, like I said, several associations that start the conversation and they think they already have a good process in mind. And Lynn spoke to this before, so I will try not to duplicate. There are lots of machines, lots of processes, lots of chemicals, lots of surfacing types. And so when you create the standard for something like this, it's something that you need to be open-minded and consider the other types of spaces that you're creating this standard for. So there are lots of different items when you're discussing play spaces, lots of different items that you're trying to disinfect or clean or sanitize. And you'll learn as this roundtable starts to take place that those words become extremely important in terms of liability and legality. So even just something as simple as creating the verbiage of the standard might be tedious at times. But there are lots of different things that you're trying to clean: plastics, aluminums, metals, things that are under shade structures, things that are indoors, things that are outdoors. So you need to be aware of the studies that exist out there that talk about temperatures. Lynn again touched on porous surfacing types versus non-porous, and how quickly that can vary, and how you might have multiple surfacing types in one small area. Some school districts might choose to use a pressure washer, while other school districts might choose to use a steamer. And in a group such as the state of California, in the school district's arena, are we talking to each other about what we're doing and why we're doing that, so that we can limit the liability should some other pandemic occur? One thing that I really think is an important consideration and should be discussed, and I'm in Arizona, so we're already seeing restaurants and gyms and stores open. And one thing that you'll start to notice too, if you haven't already, is how very differently each and every location is handling their cleaning practices, disinfecting practices. Some gyms, you have to clean the bottom of your shoe in a tray before you can walk further into the gym. That same gym, you can wear a pair of flip-flops in and change your shoes once you get in there. So Lynn also spoke about mopping. How are those mops being cleaned, and where are they being cleaned? All of those things are big considerations when you're talking about not just cleaning and sanitizing. I can tell you, one of the major restaurants, fast food restaurants, used an internal in-house group to do their cleaning and sanitizing. And their process was to take a bucket of bleach water to the very top of the slide inside and pour it down. And talk about porous and non-porous surfacing types. That bleach water then seeped into the rubber surfacing at ground level. And years later, when my teams were pulling that up, it was not a pretty sight. So big consideration for trying to come together as a group versus doing things independently. It's time to come together as a group, if you ask me. And that way, the studies are being done, the information is out there and available, so that you have good reason for doing it the way that you're doing it, for using the products that you're using. Right now, there's not a platform available. There's just really, you guys would be kind of forefront of creating that. So as you are all looking to each other for what are you doing and how are you doing it, that is quite normal, even for all of the cities, even for chains of preschools. It's all quite normal. So again, I know I'm stressing that this is forefront and beginning, but it really could be an exciting thing to California for sure. So I encourage you to think about that. I would encourage that you would maybe consider creating a standard for the disinfecting of play spaces. how you define play spaces might be different. You might do so for, like I said, the state of California. You might do so for schools just in regions. You might establish a platform with the ASTM group, because there are committee groups that sit together and establish guidelines and standards for proper procedures in these spaces. It might be the perfect platform to approach. So from here, I think it's important to establish, really, we are all in this together. This is new, absolutely, for everyone. So not knowing how to properly clean and sanitize your play structures, how often to clean and sanitize them, does steam work, how long does the coronavirus, COVID, live on a play structure, in what temperatures? All of those things are new for everyone. It's important to remember too that different people feel very differently about this topic. There are people who do not trust the CDC guidelines. There are people who do trust the CDC guidelines, and that's, specifically, whether or not they trust them doesn't matter. Do you have to go by them? There's legality involved there. So all of these things should be considered. This is absolutely going to cost a lot of money that people were not anticipating spending before. So the solutions that everyone comes up with should be something that is affordable and realistic, and the research has been done to know that the solution being proposed can work. Can anyone say 100%? I don't think necessarily, and especially not yet. But I think the approach of saying, this is what we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, not that we're hoping for the best, but we've done some work to ensure that this process and these different chemicals will work for our kids, and getting our kids back to school in the most safe way that we know how to do it. And I think that's the most that anyone can ask, because at this point, we don't know. We don't know a year from now if all of this energy and activity in creating these processes and procedures will work, but we are all certainly hopeful that they will, and we really need to be able to bounce that information back into the platform that I'm discussing. So really, overall, this is about making sure kids have a safe place to play. There's a man named Tom Norquist. I think you can Google him. He works at a company called Playcore. He speaks often in this industry about the importance of play, and I think that that is a huge consideration. We all know that our kids get a physical benefit. They also get an emotional benefit from playing. That's the goal. We want them to still have that part of their education, so that they can get into their classrooms, whatever they may look like in the future, and be able to do good work there as well. And so it's a common goal, making sure that the play spaces and all of the spaces for them to get active are safe as they can possibly be. So that's what I have to add to today's conversation. Thank you so much for the beginning of this conversation, and I really look forward to knowing what this group does from here.
And Tom Duffy here. I just wanted to just go back to your comment about play being important. In the curriculum in schools in California, people are familiar with physical education being required at the high school level, but actually even at the elementary level, the California Education Code requires a certain number of minutes of active play, recognizing that children have the need of developing large muscles, which of course happens on a playground. And so just underscoring, I think, what you were saying, that and what Lynn was saying, that these areas of play and physical activity are extremely important for the development of children in adolescence. And your comments and Lynn's comments, I think, really underscore that we need to work to make that happen, because it's basically a requirement of the law in California.
Yeah, and it may cross over into your ability to create some outdoor play spaces that overlap. I mean, how great would it be to have science class outside where you can really, you know, make a volcano explode or something like that. I certainly think that there's some room for overlap, but at this point, it becomes a financial conversation too, right? The budget is the budget, and so be very mindful to make sure that the importance of play is known, and protect the kids and their ability to get out, stretch their legs, get some sunshine and some activity that will help them in the classroom so much. Tons of studies are available on that.
Okay, Kenda, thank you so much. That's just really good information. And again, that a conversation keep going, putting things together. I think what Cash really is good at is once we get all these ideas together, is documenting it and being able to put it out to all schools. So that's a big resource that Cash offers to all its districts. So, okay, let's go on to our next slide. We've got Greg Morales with AFE Sport. And I love your tagline, Greg. We want victory, not virus. I think Governor Newsom needs that tagline as well. So let's see. Greg, are you with us?
Fine.
There you are. Good morning.
All right. But good morning. Well, actually, good afternoon. I think we're in the afternoon because it's close to 90 degrees up here in Sacramento. So I'm a little colder than you.
Chilly. I might need a sweater.
Yeah, well, all right. Let me get to my share screen here. Perfect. All right. So Tom and I spoke about this type of subject several months ago. Well, it seems like several months ago, although it was only 3 months ago. And some of you have heard me say before, you know, as a field builder, we get to build the largest classroom on campus. So this was something that was important to me. And when it came through and he put the panel together, it excited me. So I'm glad to be here to follow Lance and Ted and Lynn and Kenda and share with you some information as it pertains to artificial turf and synthetic track. So next slide, Sam. So through this, I'm going to speak kind of in generality, kind of from the perspective of the industry, which I think some of the panelists can support and endorse. But as an industry, our goal is to assist our colleagues in the school districts. Ted had mentioned since March 13th, I think the day was when it closed, and then on the Monday following, they were back. What our school district people are doing is probably not applauded, so I thank you for that. What Cash is doing to stay in front of this is hopefully is applauded, but I thank you for that. So any way that we can provide insight and information as it pertains to this subject matter is good. I'd like to kind of put 2 and 3 together. I think as we move through this, building a level of trust is probably paramount. Obviously, students and parents, they fall right under the community tagline, but it's super important that as we go through these types of moves or progressions that we are establishing a level of trust. And in doing that, obviously, our ultimate goal is to provide a safe place to play. So a clean, sanitized, and disinfected, whether it be an artificial turf field or a synthetic track. So those are some of the goals that we will try to address in doing this. So next slide, Sam. So to build trust, there's some things that we need to do. And it's funny, as this thing started, I think I had one piece of paper with like one note. And as I get through, as we got to me, now I've got like 17 pieces of paper with notes. So I want to make sure I address all of these with some of the things that I've written down. So to develop your plan, the CDC, the EPA, and other sources have information regarding cleansing of outdoor areas. So we need to refer to, there's a list, Sam, you don't need to pull it up now, but there is an EPA product list that is available, and focus on products that have kill rates of 30 seconds. So just fast effects. I think that's going to be super important. That is available. That's a resource that we can find. One thing that's also been mentioned, I know Julie had mentioned that she's in 100-degree temperature, and Jeff's in, I'm not going to say he's hotter, but 100-degree temperature as well. what we have going for us out here is heat. Heat kills, and we need to take advantage of that. So that product list, we'll share information with that. But with the heat being a factor, I think it's interesting to note that if we were to walk outside on an 85-degree day, your playing surface is probably going to be about 130 degrees. So we're taking advantage of the heat that we have here in California. A couple other things that you could factor into your plan. You could have sanitation stations on the field for players, on the sideline or in between activities. You can also spray the field with selected disinfected prior to usage. So making sure that that plan is put in place is important. How do we implement that plan? Quite simple. We just go for it. We got to keep up on the evolving information regarding the virus and the surface interface. We also need to change the plan as information from the CDC and other reputable resources come out, and we adjust to that new information. So kind of staying in front of this, and we're lucky to have a lot of school district people who are doing this, as well as industry professionals. So to maintain and revise your plan, I think that's important if we continue to do all our research, but we're all learning this together. A webinar like this is providing us with information that maybe some of us weren't familiar with. So we learn together. We need to be diligent with the new information and always listen to our community. I think community concerns are important, especially when it comes to facility usage. So make sure we're aware of that. And then lastly, stay informed and answer ongoing questions and be ready to change as things progress. So in doing this, addressing these three things, we're going to clearly be able to develop and establish some trust. So next slide, Sam. So sticking on the trust factor, we've got to have some recommended practices. We've got to make sure that we're uniform in what we're doing. So I'll just read here from the slide. The clean surfaces with approved products recommended by the manufacturer to ensure the products do not harm their surfaces. So what we'll find also in this, and it's a very sensitive subject, is we've got several different manufacturers with several different processes or endorsements. And I think we all need to be in a position to reach out to who we're working with. And hopefully together we'll be able to provide you with the right answer so we don't harm their surfaces. It's been mentioned before, and it's said there, follow all CDC guidelines as well as the EPA. I think, Ken did mention there might be some, for it, some not against, or some against it, but they're a good baseline to follow. So we'll just make sure that we are following those guidelines set forth by them. Next slide, Sam. Recommended products. So this is interesting as I started to do some research here. You've got a handful of manufacturers who are working with chemical manufacturers to make sure that they will minimize the COVID-19 virus. There's a document that I just referred to that I want Sam to hopefully distribute. If you could put that up, Sam, real quick, just so we could just see it. But it's 24 pages of, oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were going to do that, of about 10 to 12 products on each page that just that do this. They can help us here. So I'll make sure that, or well, hopefully, Sam, we can make sure that this gets distributed. But this is a start, and I think Lance had put up a slide too that was from May 20th, so it's a little more current. So things are changing, but just information like this is going to be very beneficial for us as we move through it. So back to the slide, Sam. And then our time frames. I was talking to somebody this morning about stuff like this, and it's interesting. His right here, the way he put it was, Greg, I can clean the field at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, and you walk across that field at 1 p.m. on Monday afternoon, and you've just infected the field. And it was an interesting statement because that's exactly right. And when I hear, Ted put up the picture of I believe the classroom in the gym, and Lynn talk about, the social distancing and the bleachers and doing relay races, I think it made me think about how do you play sports, with the with a 6-foot social distancing. How do you defend somebody 6 feet away? If you're an attacker, you're going to love it. But as a defender, you can't do it. But it was just interesting because once we get on that field, we just started the infecting process. So frequent disinfecting is suggested per the CDC. How often we do that is probably going to be at the discretion of the discretion, maybe with some community involvement. I'd written down a note too, just here. And then Lynn was talking about as they clean the insides, and she did a great job focusing on the inside. But the one thing that's unique about the outside is that's actually something that we can see. Perceived reality is reality. So if there's a perception that, or if there's a visual that the outside surface is being cleaned or sanitized, disinfected, the takeaway from that is probably enormous, because the perception is, wow, they're taking care of, my students, my child, my community. So it's just big. So again, perceived reality is reality. I believe next slide. These are just some generic resources that I tapped into for this. I think Lance and Lynn had some other resource pages that were a bit more detailed, but in our industry, the Synthetic Turf Council is a big one. They provide us with ongoing research for this. So it is good. I'm a little, Sam, that's my last slide. And okay, I don't want to give Marty all the time in the world.
Greg, it's okay. We've got some time for some questions.
Are you there? I can.
In listening to all of you, several things kept going through my mind, and this was I think an excellent course on how you clean. And listening to Lynn, you have to clean and get rid of all the debris before you consider even trying to disinfect. But if I'm approaching an indoor area like Lynn, like a gym or an MPR, what is it that I consider doing first when I go into that environment? So if I go back to what Lance was talking about, I want to make sure that I am protecting the employees that are entering the environment. And so what does that employee wear to go into that environment? And of course, we've seen pictures of the people, we saw them last week as well as this week, with the full garb, looking almost like a spacesuit. Is that the first thing that we concern ourselves with, that before actually touching the doorknob or the latch or opening that gym, that the employee is garbed sufficiently, and before even being garbed, that they're trained in using and we heard some of this earlier from Ed and from Lance, trained in the use of whatever the device is, trained in whatever the material the device is going to dispense, and know what to do after they have sprayed, or whatever the process is, what they have to do after that. And is this a process that includes more than one person? Is this a team that goes in? I was in listening and watching, several things went through my mind in terms of, is this a phalanx of custodial and maintenance personnel? And we just, we determined they have different roles in districts. That was also mentioned. But how do I begin to approach this if I am getting schools ready and I'm looking at a gym facility, it's indoor, I'm looking at an MPR indoor, what is it that I first plan to do?
Thank you, Tom, for those questions. So from all the webinars and things that I've been listening to and researching, it seems as though it's kind of situationally based. So remember, the virus doesn't, oh, sorry, let me turn on my video. My apologies. So the virus doesn't indefinitely live on a surface. So as we're looking to prepare to open, the first question is, how long has that space been vacant? And that'll help dictate what type of safety PPE the teams should start out with to begin that cleaning and sanitization process. So if we fast forward, obviously if everything's been vacant and it hasn't been exposed by district employees and whatnot, it's an easier, safer approach to go in with basic PPE, gloves, respirator, etc., and start your process versus, you know, did a classroom just get out where there are just 16 students in this space where the likelihood of contamination or the possibility for that is much higher. It's a hard definitive question to answer directly, but I think it also goes to what's the equipment that the district is using. I know that for the steam process, oftentimes there has to be a hose. So you have to make sure to start in a far corner and work your way backward. Oftentimes it's a two-person process because there is a team member in full PPE. Anytime you're using, remember, anything that's aerosol-like, you want to make sure the full respirator and the entire body covering is being utilized for safety purposes against those aerosol components. But if you're utilizing steam, usually it's two people, one person manning the hose to make sure it doesn't get caught up on anything, and then the actual applier with the steaming apparatus working diligently back and forth, starting at the far side and working their way backward out so that when you close it, you know that you haven't accidentally recontaminated a portion with your equipment or with yourself.
Or with your shoes.
Or with your shoes, correct. You know, I mean, it's hard PPE stuff. Just a few months ago, we were reusing bags and try to minimize the waste, etc. But the reality of COVID is, at the moment, better safe than sorry, since we don't know as much as we would like, and we don't have the treatment that we would like at the moment. So if that means booties, I know that on a commercial side, if you hire a company to come in and help sanitize your district or disinfect rooms, their folks will be in full body garb, including the hood that goes over the head, as well as the respirator, goggles, gloves, and booties that go on their feet. And they change those booties and their gloves in between areas to try and ensure that they are not cross-contaminating from one space to another. Obviously, districts might not have the same capacity as what a commercial cleaning agency has, but to keep in mind what the standards should be for different situations is definitely important.
And Lynn, that's helpful. And when you talk about to gauge a picture, and then of course I'm going to link to budgeting, but when you talk about a respirator, are we talking about something that actually allows the person that's using it to be breathing oxygen, and they're not breathing the air around them because they're breathing out of a tank, or is this something different?
No, it's not that extreme. It's just like your standard respirator you would use if you were staining wood or grinding metal or whatnot. It has the filters. It kind of looks like two square knobs on either side of your face, and it covers completely over your nose and has a seal that goes pretty tight in, around, and under, and usually has dual straps that are flexible that go around the back of your head so you can cinch it down, because you want to create that suction seal on your face when you're using a respirator. And but no, does not need to be attached to a tank or an oxygen supply device. It's just the HEPA filters in the respirator.
Okay, and let's go back to the difference that you were talking about in terms of steam and spray.
Yeah.
Could you go into a little more detail on that for me?
Sure. Obviously, like Greg had mentioned, the heat element does kill viruses and bacteria. So I know Santa Monica, for example, they have a pretty strict solvent solution, anything chemically based policies and procedures for what they're willing to utilize on their district sites. I know that steam is a really environmentally friendly option if you have the capacity and the equipment to do that. So when you're dealing with steam, obviously we all know what it is. Heat rises, and it is going to create an aerosol environment because in and of itself it is water vapor. The same can be true with pressure washing. If you're pressure washing, we recommend that you still have a respirator, goggles, gloves on when utilizing pressure washers, because once again, it's creating that aerosol environment where those water vapors are allowing the virus potentially to attach, and they're getting airborne. Now, it's a slightly different situation when you're dealing with the sprayers. You had asked the difference between steam and spraying. The backpack sprayers are solvent-based. They're not steam. They're not the same in terms of how they function. And so depending on how you're applying, the PPE can shift depending on the solvent and depending on the sprayer. Obviously, if districts are able to go above and beyond and make sure the respirator, goggles, gloves, and self coverings are available, that's ideal. But I do know that in a lot of the spray application, because it is designed to, it's not as fine. The steam is very fine vapor, so it moves around a lot. The sprayers are designed to be heavy, where the particulates want to weigh down quickly and attach themselves and coat the surfaces that you are applying them to. So it doesn't have the same radius in terms of aerosol and vapor coverage, and it's not bouncing back as much as what a steam process would be. So that's kind of up to the district and what they're comfortable with. But I have seen a lot of spray application of solvents from the backpacks where it's just a standard mask with gloves and goggles to protect any of the essential facial areas, but not the full entire garb that you would see with steam or some of the other applications. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Okay.
I have a follow-up though. I learned a term from Ted last week, and it's dwell time. So
Yeah.
Ted's still with us. And
Very
dwell
important.
time.
Dwell time is crucial.
And so when you were talking about both the steam and the spray, I thought, okay, so what now is dwell time here, and do I factor that in? And is this something that now I come back and I wipe down, or I don't wipe down? And how do I know to plan for one or the other? So is steam, I just let it be, and the spray I wipe down, or vice versa?
So it's kind of a multifaceted answer. It definitely depends on what type of process you're utilizing and what type of solution has been approved that you're using. I know different chemical composites, different chemistries have different dwell times and have different instructions as to whether or not you can or should come back and wipe down any excess moisture once that dwell time has been achieved, or if they want you to let it completely air dry. And it should tell you on the manufacturer label as to what the directions are and what the requirements are. the only thing we always recommend is that if you're going with the longer dwell time solutions, maybe just test a small portion on the surface that you're going to put it on to see if you wind up with any adverse discoloration or anything like that that could potentially affect your surface. But for the most part, these chemistries are trying to not be detrimental to the surfaces that they go on. They're just trying to have comprehensive coverage and kill off that virus if it has attached to that surface.
Okay, that's helpful. But the next question that came to mind was listening to what you were saying, Kenda, when you talked about how certain material was used on a permanent flooring or some other kind of surfacing, and that sometime later you found that there was this deterioration. And of course, Lynn just talked about some of that. So is the spray going to be something in that is going to be harmful over time, and so I just have to live with that within the school district? Or is the steam going to be harmful over time, or is one going to be worse on the material than the other?
Can you hear me? I can't get my video to work, but I'm happy to answer that.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, so, oh, I think I can get back on now. I would say that what I've found over the years is that it depends on the harshness of the chemical, and it depends on how harsh a chemical is allowed at the school district. So all of the products that were ever used with the company that I owned were child safe, and the only negative to that is sometimes you have bacteria or virus that is stronger than an earth-friendly, child-safe type product. And typically when you cross over that boundary, you do end up with, for example, if you're spraying a green playground post, you end up with a lighter green. You can see if you spray it, the spray marks and the drippings. If you leave that dwell time and it's sitting and baking in the sun, certainly you're going to have damage to that. The same is true though with a steamer. If you use a steamer and you have someone not trained or qualified to use that steamer, they can burn a hole right through the slide, and that's a very expensive mistake. So certainly there's pros and cons to whatever it is that you're using, and conversation about that and what that should be within a school district or whatever group is certainly recommended.
But there may be some consequence, and that's something to take into consideration. We want to make sure everybody's safe, in particular the employee that's applying this. We want to make sure that when students come in after it, it's going to have taken care of the virus. And we would like to be able to say we've got a long-term use here where we're not causing great deterioration on whatever that material is. It's capital funding is too hard to get to, so you don't want to have to be replacing materials like flooring too often. But and I hadn't had any of those thoughts until I heard what you were talking about before. Well, let me shift, Greg, if I can, to you. When you were talking and you showed that incredibly detailed list of materials, there must be some concern that a district will have about the liability for the use of certain materials and or applicators, both to the employee that's using it or to the student or faculty member that comes into a facility. Is there any guidance on that? Are there discussions that are happening in the industry about this at this time? Can you assist us with that, or is that something we need to maybe end up talking with Marty and some other attorneys about?
Well, I've got two answers that I think. The first answer was when you use the word liability, I thought we might as well refer to Marty. But I think what is happening in the industry, and because the slide is still up, you're seeing the Synthetic Turf Council domain there.
Yes.
They're kind of the resource for the industry. I mean, don't be fooled by the name synthetic turf, because they also are part of tracks as well. But when I was browsing through their website, I mean, a lot of what they're, I'm not going to use the word redirecting, but where they're directing some of their information is to the CDC and or the EPA. I don't think, and again, this, you know, our conversation last week with David led a little bit to this, is manufacturers and or builders. I think we're all tiptoeing around the right recommendation because of the liability involved. Again, but back to what Lynn had referenced about the heat and all of us. I mean, what we have going for us is the fact that we're heat. I mean, Julie used the word pesky little COVIDs, and Lynn said something little boogers. I'm not sure what she said, but it was something. I wrote it down because I thought, how do I think of a third name for that? But I'm not sure, you know, what the right answer is to that, Tom, other than the resources that are available to us.
But something that clearly school district leaders will have to take into consideration. And I referenced budget a moment ago. Clearly, the work that we're talking about right now is beyond work that is typically done by a school district in their maintenance and operations that is funded out of their general fund. We're talking about the use of equipment that districts typically don't have, so they either have to buy it or they have to hire someone that has it to come in and use the material and the equipment in order to achieve the goal of cleaning and disinfecting. So all this work that we're talking about is going way beyond anything that districts have typically done, unless I'm wrong. Anybody want to differ with me on that? Either anybody that has been a presenter? This is all new to me. So I now have to recognize that for the current year, I've got expenses. The budget year begins July 1st. I've got expenses that I have to make sure that I calculate and estimate, because I'm going to have to find that in this year's budget. I'm a school district person, and I've got a plan for it for next year. And none of you, I don't expect any of you to be able to answer this question, because you don't have the answer. We don't know the size of the district. We don't know the choices that are going to be made. But clearly, this is going to be an expensive venture on the part of school districts, and that's something I think we need to explore. So anyway, I'll stop. All of this has been very helpful, and thank you for being so patient with my questions for all of you.
All right, well, thank you, Greg and Tom, and Lynn on that as well. Let's go to that next slide, Sam. We've got Marty Hom from Atkins, Andelson, Loya, Road, and Romo, and he's going to talk about the Civic Center Act requests and uses, which is probably going to be a hot topic coming up. We've already had conversations in our district on it. Honestly, it's something that those in the business side feel very strongly on, and those in the community do not appreciate our feeling on it. So thanks, Marty. Come on up.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I always get this slot right before lunch, so I'm what's holding everybody up between here and lunch. Kind of the next slide, Sam. So I'm just going to start off with the goal of the Civic Center Act. I'm sure everybody knows this, but every public school is considered a civic center where the community or citizens, clubs can apply and use school facilities. Can the next slide, Sam, please? So under the Civic Center Act, the management, direction, and control of the school facilities is with the school board, as you can imagine. And the school board can set terms and conditions for its use. So hopefully all of you school district people out there have something in the board policies. They're usually found at board policy 1330 and administrative reg 1330. And hopefully it'll set forth what is the process to use the Civic Center Act. You know, maybe there's an application, insurance requirements, who has priority. There are certain things that cannot be done on a school property. I always found this kind of interesting if you actually look at the Civic Center Act. It's like, of course, no illegal acts, I think there's one part that says you can't discuss treason against the government or things like that. So let me step back a couple of months, because I made this chronology as I was looking at this. March 4th, as we all know, the governor said there's this statewide emergency. And March 13, everybody's phones were ringing off the hook as schools were being rumored were going to shut down. So what a lot of school districts did, I don't think all of them did, was they passed an emergency resolution that basically said, we are going to give the superintendent power to modify schedules, basically close the schools, whatnot. So I start there because the Civic Center Act, I don't know if you had requests during this whole time. I know some districts did, saying, hey, we want to come in and use your multi-purpose room as a childcare center or things like that. And I know a lot of districts basically just said no, because the governor's stay-at-home order of March 19th had come out at this point and basically said, no, the school district is shut down. We are not going to use our facilities for anything. So I stepped forward and, oh, Sam, can I have the next slide, please? So the board policies, I'm going to go back to the regulations, are hopefully you have an application and agreement for the use of facilities. Very important now is this hold harmless agreement, require certificate of insurance, terms and conditions for use. So as we're moving forward, and I guess the state's moving to phase 3, you may start getting Civic Center Act requests. My first thought were, well, the churches, the houses of worships, they've been given permission to reopen. So I know a lot of churches hold services at school sites. So what is it that you're going to do? So as you move forward, I would suggest you go through your board policies and administrative regulations and say, we need to update these for the current situation. It's really going to be in the terms and conditions for use. So that should set forth what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed not to do. But obviously, at this point, they're not going to address the social distancing. So you're probably going to have to go in there and update that and said, okay, if somebody comes in to use it, they're going to have to abide by the CDC guidelines for social distancing. And you also have to look at what are your local requirements. That might entail signage or making sure that the chairs are 6 feet apart and things like that, and capacity too. For instance, I'll go back to the churches. I just looked at the state policy for houses of worships, and they're only allowing churches or houses of worship to be at 25% occupancy, which may be different than others, but should that apply if you have a church into your multi-purpose room? Other things would be, well, what about this cleaning and the disinfecting? And we've just heard for the last hour and a half on all of these procedures that could be used. Sam, can I have the next slide, please? So definitely check on some of those. So you could refer back to CDC or the state public health, what should be done to clean and disinfect. So some of this may take care of itself, as I heard, I think maybe it was Lynn, talk about flex space. So if your multi-purpose room is suddenly going to be turned into classrooms, you may not even have that available for civic center use. Or are you going to disassemble your multi-purpose room classrooms on Friday so the churches can come in on Sunday, hold their service, and then you're going to have to disinfect it and hold class again on Monday. So I started off with the kind of the definition of the Civic Center Act, and throughout there it really says the school board may allow the use of their facilities. So as I said, some of this may get dictated by how the classes are going to be held in the fall, perhaps your flex spaces, as Lynn talked about, your gyms, your multi-purpose rooms, they may be turned into classrooms. So the next thing, kind of the next slide, Sam, please. is look at your terms and uses conditions, and you should also go through and recalculate your usage fees. So if you remember way back when, the Civic Center Act just talked about direct costs necessitated by the use of the Civic Center Act, and everybody kind of did their own thing, and it wasn't super clear. I think 5 or 6 years ago, they actually had a bill that came through and gave some direction on what the direct costs are. So now there's 2 categories of direct costs that you can calculate your fees on. There's the direct capital direct costs, and then there's the operational direct costs. So the capital direct costs are things like maintenance, repair, restoration, refurbishment of the actual facility itself. It's the operational direct costs, which are supplies, utilities, janitorial, employee time, their salaries to operate and maintain the grounds, and actually the administrative time to implement the Civic Center Act. So I would think that you would probably go back to your operational direct costs and have to go in and recalculate, saying, if I have to go and disinfect and clean these facilities after a Civic Center Act, that's definitely going to drive up your costs. So you come up with a new hourly rate to charge people. The other thing down there, I don't know that I see it too much, is the entertainment. You can charge them the fair market value. That's where somebody actually comes on under the Civic Center Act to use your facilities and charge admission. But I think the ones you're probably going to start getting relatively soon were the youth sports and the religious uses. So I know Greg talked about what you're supposed to do for your fields. So say the soccer people come on, I'm just not quite sure at this time, and maybe, I don't know if Greg even has any sort of suggestion on that. How often do you have to clean? Maybe it's between games. And we also heard other people talk about, do we put out more hand washing stations? But all of these costs should be recalculated into your usage fees. I think one thing that Tom brought up and talked with Greg is, well, the liability of all of these things is really, you kind of have to do your due diligence. And I think if you have these procedures in place, I've always been a little bit worried about this, that somebody who may get infected is going to sue the school district and said, well, I used your facilities and I got sued. I mean, I got infected. And so I think if you have these procedures in place, you disinfect and you follow the CDC guidelines, you're going to act in a more reasonable kind of manner, because any lawsuit's going to be a tort, which would probably be, well, you were negligent, you didn't clean, you didn't disinfect, you didn't do anything, and because of that, I got sick. So that's pretty much really it for the Civic Center Act stuff. I think a lot of it's really going to kind of see what happens in the fall when schools reopen. And I do believe, other lawyers out there might disagree with me, I do believe you have the ability to say no. So if you go back to your emergency resolutions, they were passed on the basis that, where was it? I wrote it down the other day. It was that there was a threat to public service or facilities. And that's how most of these school boards were able to meet on an emergency basis and pass this emergency resolution. So those emergency resolutions are probably still in place, and are still in place, and they give the superintendent a fair amount of direction to say, no, we're going to leave our facilities closed, the Civic Center Act at this point in time. So I don't know if there's anything else. Let me look at the questions. Kathy Allen, wouldn't the hold harmless help protect districts from that type of lawsuit? Yes. Oh, thanks, Kathy, for bringing that back up. So I would suggest going back into your hold harmless agreement and make sure that it is going to cover you against the current situation. It's probably pretty general right now that says you're going to hold us harmless to anybody who gets harmed or property that is damaged that's caused by you during the use of this. So anything else? And I know somebody had talked about ASKIP. I know they have a large book or kind of a handout that talks about facility usage and kind of reducing your risk. I think a lot of that still applies. So I don't know if there's anything else. Tom is going to come up with a question, I presume.
Yeah, I have a big one for you, Marty. What if a Board of Education just simply says, we don't know enough. In order to protect the district, we don't want to cause angst for anyone that wants to come in and use any of our facilities, whether it's AYSO or Little League or even a church that would be using on a weekend or some other use. So we're just going to have, for the period of time between now and whenever, maybe between, say for the first quarter or for the first half of the school year, we're going to say no to any outside use of our facilities. Is that something? One, you said districts that the code says that they may use this, but the experience I have working at the local level is that this is an expectation that you're obligated to provide the facilities for uses for the outside community, very much like a park. So although it says may in statute, can a district say, no, we're not going to allow any uses at this point in time because of the unknowns? Is that defensible?
I think it's defensible because it's really weird. The statute throughout uses the word may. The district may allow the use of its facilities. However, in one of the sections for like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, the soccer, it actually says shall allow the use of. So there's a bit of risk in taking that position, Tom, and I know it's probably more of a political risk than anything. But at the moment, I think you still have pretty solid grounds because of all of the local orders and things like that, and the governor's orders, stay-at-home orders that basically say, look, everything's pretty much shut down. But as we've seen this week, things are starting to move really quickly. I mean, I, for one, need a haircut, but I know all those people, that happened like overnight, the haircutting places. And I think the gyms are going to happen real soon too. So it's a bit of a risk to take that, but I think you can make that argument on behalf of public safety, for the safety of our students and staff. We're not going to let the outside use because we're just not sure that we're going to be able to disinfect it in time for the students to come back.
And I think that's really the best argument, that our first obligation is to provide educational services to children. We can't provide those services unless we're in a safe environment. We can't guarantee the safe environment, and if we can even do that, we can't guarantee it unless we have appropriately planned for the cleaning and disinfecting of these spaces. And so we're going to say no.
Right.
And I think that's a very, very good defense, that our first obligation is the students of the district. Going back to your bullet points, and you identified the costs, and anyone that has ever gone to their board and said, okay, we need to increase the cost of uses, knows that you bring everyone in and they're saying, no, we can't afford this and the like. So it's never easy, but it would seem to me that if indeed I am going to this extra level of cleaning and disinfecting, much as we've discussed today, and hearing from Lance and Ted and then Linda and Greg, that I probably more than any other time, at least in my history with schools, this would be a time when I could say, here, let me show you what these costs are, because I can show you pictures of people disinfecting and the like. So I think that if indeed the uses are to continue, that being able to increase, at least for a period of maybe the next year, the use of facilities fees would be easier than ever before.
Right.
That's speculation on my part, but your comments made me think about that.
Sure, you're certainly entitled to recover your costs for that. I mean, it might even be possible to say, you have to do this. Maybe you have to hire these people, hire Lynn Lees to come in and do the services for you.
Yeah, yeah, and the even with that use, you know, I use the L word before liability. Even with that, if there is a use, I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. If there is a use of a school by someone from the community, and that person becomes ill, we don't know that they became ill at school, but they were in the school, and maybe it was Civic Center Act use. Maybe it was simply a parent coming into the office. But I think districts have to make sure that they're wearing both belt and suspenders when it comes to Civic Center Act uses because of a challenge that may occur. We know that even with slip and falls, districts are sued in Civic Center Act matters.
Yep.
Well, Marty, I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago in our district of Palm Springs, our county supervisor has requested the use of our Palm Springs High Gym for homeless shelter at night. And so we complied, and they actually bring in their cleaners in the morning and clean up. But, you know, we've got the toilet sitting outside. We have the temporary showers sitting outside the gym right now as we go through. And, you know, we don't have students on campus, even though we do have construction. But yeah, there's a lot of angst going on with that. And if someone does come in, as we know, all coaches have keys, right? If they do come in during the day and it wasn't cleaned enough, you know, what's that liability there? And it is difficult. Would you suggest a resolution going to the board outlining this that would make some type of, that way it's not just a fight, that maybe until all restrictions are relaxed for public schools, K-12 public schools, that all use be suspended unless on a case-by-case basis approved by the Board of Education?
Yeah, because what does it go to M&L, and M&L will probably coordinate with the site administrator, saying somebody needs to use the gym or the site during this time to make sure it doesn't interfere with any of the educational programs. Yeah, I would probably put in the resolutions that we're going to suspend all Civic Center Act uses during this period of time due to this.
Right. I know we took a resolution deeming our construction essential to allow us to keep moving forward. So doing that resolution up and having it approved by your board would probably stop arguments, at least on a lower level.
Sure, it puts it in front of the board and makes it a little bit more public. It's been published on the agenda. If anybody had any heartache with that, they could have come to the meeting and said they're 3 minutes worth or 2 minutes worth, whatever you have.
Well, or they could come to our YouTube channel where we hold our meetings. Yeah.
And I think somebody else on the panel was talking about, if you're a small district, maybe you have like 1 or 2 custodians, and their sole job after the Civic Center Act was to make sure the trash was taken out. Now you've got this extra burden on them to do all this disinfecting and cleaning, which they may not have time for.
True, and making sure they're trained, just like they said, making sure our people are trained for it.
Right.
That's tough. It's one of those where, you know, as Tom said, this is really all about our students and keeping our students safe, but all of our K-12 public schools, you know, you've got community use there, and our tax dollars pay for those.
Yeah, because I remember, I think some of the childcare people came in and said, I want to use your room for childcare for first, you know, responders and stuff. I think many districts said no.
Yeah, that would be, yeah, that's a tough one.
That was a hard one.
Yeah.
Well, Marty and Julie, looks like Ted is asking if Cash can draft the resolution you were talking about. So Marty, how about you and I have a sidebar
Sure.
conversation after this? But if I can, Julie, I wanted to go back to Ted and Lance for a moment. Ted, you had talked about the survey that was done at Capistrano, and you had about 15,000 respondents. and that's roughly less than a third of the district, but that's still a good number. What kind of survey was this? Was this an email survey? Was this a paper and pencil survey? Did you use both, or did you also use a telephone? And did you use a company that does surveys? You know, how was that conducted? And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question in a minute.
Yeah, so it was a Google survey. It was emailed out to all the parents through our listserv. The response from the communications department on Tuesday after the long weekend shared that there was 15,000 responses, but that some people had commented that they weren't able to log on to the Google survey. So that was as of Tuesday. I have not received an update from leadership this week, but I'm a parent in the district, and I know we filled out a survey for both of our kiddos. The survey was twofold. One, how is distance learning going for parents, generally speaking? And then two, what parents' feeling was for when students return to school, if there is restrictions in place as far as limiting extracurricular activities and face masks and social distancing and smaller classroom sizes and so on and so forth. What parents' feelings were on that, and that if they would still continue to send their children to traditional school, or would they be interested in the district's online learning platform. We have a distance learning program in the district, serves 400 or 500 students. Pretty robust online training, offers a lot of alternatives to the traditional school environment. So the district took the opportunity to send some information out to families in regards to that small program, thinking that there's going to be a number of people who don't want to come back and deal with this, and what can we offer them. So that was really kind of the pulse that the district was trying to take. How's distance learning going for you now, working with your classroom teacher from home online? If your student returns in the fall and there's restrictions in place, would you send your student to school, or would you be interested in the district's online learning alternative? So,
and did you talk about requirements such as wearing a mask or taking temperature? Did you go into any depth?
Yes, the district posed those questions in the survey, and even I think went as far as to say, well, if your student were to return 2 days a week or 3 days a week, would you still send them back to school, or would you be looking at an alternative? So I think it was trying to gauge people's threshold, right? So if my 5th grader is going to school 3 days a week and he's having lunch in the classroom and he's social distancing and he goes in late and he leaves early, would my wife and I send him to school? We would. 2 days a week? I don't know. So the district posed those options for families, and again, we have a committee, talking about all these same issues here, and the direction seems to be to make some recommendations to our board on June 17th. We start school August 18th, and it's countdown. Our last day is June 4th, and clock is started.
Well, I think what your district did is a smart thing. Using surveys to gauge, especially at a critical time like now, to gauge where parents are is it's just wise, and clearly that's new information. So you or others are just probably sorting through it. But the reason I asked the question is that our next webinar, and Julie's going to talk about that in a moment. We will share information from a survey that Cash did that was a post-election survey, it's the second one. And we asked some of the questions that we just discussed about parents' interest in sending their children back to school on alternative schedules, and if there are certain requirements that we just discussed in place. So that may be something you'd like to tune into next week. my last, Julie, if I can, just my last question was really for Lance and Ted in the work you're doing in Orange County, and you've referenced employee groups, but are the employee groups part of the team that is coming together, I think every Tuesday or so in your district, or are you having some other communication, some ex parte communication with them?
At the cabinet level, HR I think is working both closely with both of the bargaining units. I don't know if, to be honest, I don't believe they have a seat at the table. I think those are all sidebar conversations. This is the district's trying to make recommendations going forward. We have MOUs in place with both bargaining units. I think the district's trying to do what's right for students, and
the MOUs are for
the bargaining unit members. Kind of one was outlining for the teachers what distance learning looked like and what the expectations were, and then for classified employees, outlined protocols for work from home and social distancing and things of that nature, covering emergency leave acts and FMLA, extended FMLA, and those types of programs.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Julie.
Oh, thank you, Tom. All right, let's go ahead. I know we're right at our time limit here, so I'll go through this pretty quick. I just want to say a big thank you to Jeff, Lance, Ted, Lynn, Kinda, Greg, and Marty, and of course, always Tom Duffy. Great discussion. Big thanks to Sam and Caitlin, who are wizards behind our Zoominars here. Next week, as Tom mentioned, the CASH webinar is on Thursday, June 4th. It's on communications, parents, student, employees, and community. Communications between all parties in our community are critical during this era of COVID-19. The public discourse on the news and in most conversations frequently finds the questions, when will schools be open? And then the question that follows, will schools be safe from the virus? Big questions. So this webinar will give information from CASH on a survey, as Tom mentioned, that was conducted last week, as how respondents feel about schools reopening, new limits that may be imposed upon students, and the initiation of unusual class scheduling that may be needed to support and control social distancing. And probably talk a little bit more with Bob about where he got those, but those were actually respondents from community members who are frequent voters, which is where the survey actually went. So it wasn't just limited to schools, it was overall. Presenters are also going to discuss the impacts of social distancing may have upon vital services provided to students with special needs. We know that's a huge impact, as Jeff mentioned at the beginning of our webinar. And other discussions during the webinar will involve a comment from our parents with young children as what they expect to see at schools when they return, communication between school districts and employees of county offices of education, and district partners and communities at large, including other public agencies. So CASH, myself, and all the presenters on the webinar today extend our best wishes for continued good health to you and your family. CASH will continue to keep you informed through emails and webinars, and I will try and get that resolution put together and get up on our COVID link on our CASH website. So again, gratitude and thanks to all our essential workers and frontline heroes out there. And please follow your recommended county healthcare directives for your area. And as we leave you today, remember most of all, the CASH organization is here to help and be a resource to all of you. It's so important we in our school industry share vital information and connect with each other. So signing off, thank you, and we'll be here next week. Stay CASH strong. Take care. Have a great weekend.